I'm a 31-year-old woman, and despite having traveled quite a bit and seen my fair share of the world, I still manage to make rookie mistakes. That's totally on me. No excuses. I try to stay sharp and cautious online, but it's so easy to let your guard down. After being in Canada for nearly 3 months, I started to feel restless. Watching reruns of Love Island in my small apartment was getting old, so I decided to reactivate my dating apps. I didn't have any clear goals in mind, mostly just wanted someone to hang out with and see how things went from there. I ended up matching with this guy who seemed to have a lot in common with me. We exchanged a few messages, and he came across as pretty chill. After a bit of back and forth on the app, I felt comfortable enough to give him my number. Over the next couple of weeks, we texted here and there, and it felt like we had a decent vibe going. Eventually, we decided to meet up in person. We agreed on a local bar, had a few drinks, and talked for a while. I'll admit, when I first saw him in person, I didn't recognize him immediately. He didn't quite look like his photos. Not that he looked bad or anything, but he definitely used some old or heavily edited pictures. I'm not trying to be shallow here. He was still attractive. Just not exactly what I had expected. I think at this point, most of us expect that what we see online might not be the same in real life, and I was fine with that. We ended up getting along pretty well, though. We covered the usual first date topics: work, hobbies, travel. I told him a bit about my life back in Australia and how different things were compared to here. Somewhere during our conversation, we were holding hands, and I felt at ease. As we were leaving, he asked if I wanted to go back to his place for a cup of coffee. I told him straight up that I knew what coffee actually implied, and I wasn't into that idea on the first date. He laughed it off and promised it would just be coffee. He even offered to drive me home afterwards so I wouldn't have to call a cab. I hesitated, but agreed, figuring it was better than sitting at the bar any longer. We walked to his place, which was only a few streets away. On the way up to his apartment, though, he started saying weird stuff. He joked about how I wasn't like most girls because I agreed to go to his place, and then made this awkward joke about how I could be walking into a trap. "For all you know, I could be some crazy guy," he said with this strange grin. Then, he glanced down at my dress and made some stupid comment about my boobs. I brushed it off again, reminding him that this night wasn't going to end the way he probably hoped. Once we got inside, he excused himself to the bathroom, leaving me standing awkwardly in the middle of his small studio apartment. There wasn't even a couch, just his bed right in the middle of the room. As I waited, my eyes wandered. That's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. 2 masks sitting on a shelf by the bed. One looked like a goofy cartoon goat, and the other was either a cat or some kind of wild animal. Then, not far from the masks, I noticed a huge hunting knife and a small axe, both just sitting out in the open. It didn't end there. Draped over a chair was a black hoodie, and on his nightstand was a pair of latex gloves. At that point, I had a gut feeling that I shouldn't stick around. I stood up, telling myself to stay calm, and walked out of his apartment without saying a word. I hurried down the stairs, my heart racing, and flagged down a ride a couple blocks away. Looking back, I might have just hurt some random guy's feelings. Maybe he was totally harmless, and just had a weird taste in decor. But all those things together, the masks, the knife, the gloves, it didn't sit right with me. I felt bad for leaving like that, but I'd much rather feel guilty than end up in some dangerous situation. Afterward, I tried to check if he messaged me, but I noticed he either blocked me on the dating app or deleted his profile altogether. We all make bad choices in life, but this time, I outdid myself. Like, really messed up. I agreed to meet some dude from a dating app, and because I hate driving, it makes me super nervous. I asked him to pick me up at my apartment. We had been texting for a few weeks, sure, but I still knew better. Looking back, I realize how much worse things could have gone. But I'm here, so I guess that's something. He pulled up in his car and told me he was taking me out for sushi. That sounded perfect because sushi is my favorite. He typed the restaurant's name into his GPS, and we started driving. At first, everything seemed fine. We were chatting, laughing. But then, as I glanced out the window, I noticed something weird. Trees. Lots of trees. This wasn't right. We were supposed to head toward the city, not into the middle of nowhere. The feeling of dread started creeping in. He said nervously. I swear the GPS brought us this way. I didn't plan this. I could feel the panic rising. Can we just head back to the city? I asked, trying to stay calm, but my voice was shaking. He must have seen the fear written all over my face because he looked just as freaked out as I was. In my head, I was cursing myself. I should have just faced my fear of driving and met him at the restaurant. Or better yet, I shouldn't have come at all. What was I thinking? Now I'm going to end up dead in these woods or something. Desperately, I opened my phone to see if I could help him with the directions. That's when he said it. The words that made my stomach drop. There's no signal out here. I tried to stay calm, to keep my face from giving away the sheer terror I was feeling. Inside, though, I was a mess. My hands were freezing, but I was sweating like crazy. If this guy was planning something, I almost wished he'd just do it already. The waiting, the not knowing, was killing me. His forehead was shiny with sweat. He kept mumbling, I swear, this isn't on me. I'm really trying to get us back on track to the sushi place. I don't care about sushi anymore, I snapped, my voice shaky. Just take us anywhere with people. A gas station, a store, anywhere. He let out a nervous laugh and said, I don't have a shovel or a weapon in my trunk, if that's what you're worried about. Honestly, that comment did nothing to calm me down. After what felt like hours, we finally arrived at the restaurant. The relief I felt was unreal, but I was still on edge. I wasn't hungry at all, and my hands were still trembling. The fact that he didn't do anything to me during that nightmare drive should have made me feel safer. But the tension lingered. I'd already decided I was taking an Uber home. No way was I going through another car ride like that with him. But what really threw me off was when, as we sat down to eat, he casually asked, So, when do you think we'll have sex? I nearly spit out my drink. I couldn't believe he'd ask that, especially after the whole ordeal I'd just gone through. I felt like I'd barely escaped a horror movie, and here he was, asking me when I'd sleep with him. He kept going, like he hadn't noticed how freaked out I was, saying, So, what's the deal? Are you gonna make me wait? A week? A month? I just stared at him, completely dumbfounded. I couldn't even find the words to respond. Well, I'm not waiting a whole month, he said, sounding annoyed. The rest of the meal was painfully awkward. I couldn't wait to leave. As soon as dinner was over, I said a quick goodbye and booked it into my Uber. Just as we pulled out of the parking lot, my phone buzzed. It was him. The message read, Yeah, I don't think this is gonna work. I need a girl with a higher sex drive. I didn't even bother responding with anything more than, okay. I was just relieved to be done with him. The Uber ride home was so different. No creepy woods, no getting lost. It was just a short, 15-minute trip, passing houses, streetlights, and other cars. I felt safe for the first time that night, and I couldn't help but wonder, why had the drive to the restaurant taken us deep into the forest, but the Uber ride back was so quick and straightforward? It gave me chills. I still don't know if that guy was up to something dangerous or if it was all just a weird coincidence. But that night, I learned a lesson I should have already known. Never let a stranger from a dating app pick you up in their car. About 5 years ago, I figured I'd give Tinder a shot. I wasn't expecting much, but I thought, why not? I set up a profile pretty quickly and started swiping around. After about an hour of figuring out how it worked, I matched with this guy who lived nearby. We started chatting right away, sending messages back and forth most of the afternoon. We shared interests, asked random questions, and just talked. By the evening, he gave me his number, and we switched from Tinder to texting. For the first few days, everything seemed fine. We were texting almost every day, and the conversations were pretty casual. It felt like I had gotten really lucky, matching with someone nice on my first try with the app. But that feeling didn't last long. On the fourth day, things took a weird turn. His texts became more uncomfortable, and he started asking strange questions, some sexual, some just odd. Now we had flirted a little here and there, but nothing over the top. Then suddenly he was bombarding me with very personal, sexually charged questions. It was way too much. Too fast. I shut it down quickly, telling him I wasn't okay with where the conversation was heading. He apologized and seemed to respect my boundaries at first. From there, I decided to proceed with caution. I hadn't been on many dates by the time I was 23, and this was my first real try at online dating. I assumed maybe this was just part of how things went, but deep down, I had a weird feeling. A few days later, he asked if I wanted to grab a coffee. I agreed, though I wasn't too excited about it. I made sure to let a couple of friends know where I was going and who I was meeting, just in case. We settled on a small cafe in town. But even before we met, the conversation took another strange turn. He started making all these assumptions, like we were definitely going to sleep together or something. I had to shut him down more than once, saying that wasn't happening. Then, out of nowhere, he started talking about us running away together. He kept saying how he was going to take me away, how we should just disappear and elope. It was unsettling. Just as I was thinking about how to respond, I got another text from him. This time, he told me he had rope and duct tape in the back of his car, ready for us to use. That was it for me. I cut off all contact, stopped responding, and immediately blocked him. I reported his profile on Tinder, but beyond that, I wasn't sure what else to do. I did make sure to warn anyone I knew using Tinder to watch out for this guy, just in case they came across him. So, to the guy with the rope and duct tape who wanted to take me away, let's never meet again. This happened around 3 years back. I was 22 at the time, just dipping my toes into online dating and still figuring things out. One of the first guys I connected with was someone named Jake. Not his real name, of course. Jake seemed like a chill guy. We chatted for about a week, mostly about random stuff like video games and shows we both liked. Nothing unusual. After about 7 days of back and forth, Jake asked if we could meet up. I thought it over, and since everything seemed normal and he didn't raise any red flags, I agreed. That's when I made a big rookie mistake. I gave him my address so he could pick me up. Thinking back now, I realize how dangerous that was. Things could have taken a much darker turn than they did. The next day, I was super nervous, getting ready for what would be my first real online date. Luckily, my roommate Emma was home, and she ended up witnessing everything that went down. About half an hour before Jake was supposed to show up, Emma and I spotted 2 cars pulling up outside our small apartment complex. 3 guys got out, and they immediately gave off a bad vibe. They were all in their mid-40s, scruffy, and looked like they hadn't left the countryside in years. Emma and I brushed it off at first, thinking they were there for someone else. But then, we heard loud, aggressive knocks on the front door of the building. Our place was locked unless you lived there, so these guys clearly didn't belong. Being as naive as I was back then, I assumed they were just looking for one of the other tenants. So, like an idiot, I opened the door and asked them who they were there for. The guy standing in the middle stared at me with this unsettling smile and said, "We're here for Lisa." At that moment, my gut twisted, and I went from being polite to absolutely terrified. The way they were staring at me made my skin crawl. I stupidly admitted, "Yeah, I'm Lisa." That was mistake number 3. The guy in the middle gave me this unsettling grin and said, "Oh yeah, you definitely look like your photos." I felt a shiver run through me, and immediately demanded to know who they were and why they were here. He calmly replied that they were friends of Jake, and they had come to pick me up for our date. I asked where Jake was, and he gave a nasty little laugh, pointing to one of the cars parked behind a tree. "He's waiting in the car," he said. But from where I was standing, I couldn't see if anyone was actually in that car. Thankfully, my gut kicked in, and I wasn't about to fall for it. I told them if Jake wanted me to come out, he could walk up and get me himself. That's when the guy on the right stepped forward, smirking, and asked, "How about you ditch Jake and have some fun with me instead?" I tried to close the door, but he shoved his boot in, keeping it wedged open. "If not me, at least one of my friends here," he added with a sleazy grin. I froze, but just then, Emma stormed out of our hallway, grabbed me, yanked me back inside, and slammed the door shut. They pounded on the door, yelling stuff I won't even repeat, while Emma was already on the phone with the police. We waited, holding our breath, until the pounding stopped. Eventually, we peeked out from our living room window, watching as they got back into their cars and drove off. And surprise, there was no one else in that second car. Hours later, I got a message from Jake saying, "So sorry, my buddies thought it'd be funny to mess with you. You'll see, I'm actually a really nice guy when we finally hang out." I blocked him right away, deleted my account, and swore off online dating. The cops said there wasn't much they could do since I hadn't gotten their names or the car plates. So in the end, I never found out what happened to those guys. I matched with a girl on a dating app, let's call her Sarah. She seemed super chill, and I was immediately attracted to her. At the time, I had just turned 19, and I'm bi, but totally inexperienced with both guys and girls. I had my profile set to match with people between 19 and 26. Sarah was 21. We started chatting almost every day, and over the course of a month, I found myself telling her a lot about myself. She seemed trustworthy enough. I admitted to her that I hadn't done much of anything with anyone, and she said that she thought it was really attractive. It made me a little uneasy, but I just figured maybe it was normal to feel weird about talking like that. After that, her questions became more intimate, like whether I'd kissed anyone or what I thought about certain things in bed. She started saying we should meet up soon, and that she couldn't wait to be my first. I brushed it off, thinking maybe this was just how people talked when they were interested. I had talked to a few guys before on the app, and some would send inappropriate photos almost immediately, so I assumed this was just how things went. Still, something about Sarah's comments made me feel embarrassed. She kept mentioning how much she liked the idea of me being a virgin and how it was turning her on. I finally told her it was making me uncomfortable, and to my surprise, she apologized. A few days went by with no contact from her. I texted her once or twice, but she didn't respond. I assumed that was the end of it. Then, out of the blue, she sent me a weird link. I didn't really pay much attention before clicking on the link, but that turned out to be a huge mistake. It took me to a site selling sex toys, featuring a massive strap-on. I felt grossed out and quickly closed the page, but Sarah kept blowing up my phone with messages. She told me she had already bought it for us and couldn't wait to use it on me when we finally met up. She went into way too much detail about the positions she'd put me in, and how she wouldn't stop until I was screaming. She even said a girl like me needed something that big. I felt my stomach turn just reading it. That was when I realized Sarah wasn't just some overly forward person, she was unhinged. I told her she was seriously creeping me out, and her response? She doubled down, saying she loved how I was being feisty, and couldn't wait to make me her personal plaything. That was it. I deleted my entire profile and swore off the app for good. I didn't mention it to anyone, not even my closest friends. It just felt too weird to talk about, especially because, in my mind, I never expected another girl to be so predatory. I think society still overlooks how dangerous women can be in these situations, and I know for sure that Sarah was a woman. Bumble has that photo verification thing, where you have to match your selfie to a pose they ask for, so it couldn't have been some creepy older guy pretending. But even now, years later, I still think about that encounter sometimes. I worry about what might have happened if she managed to meet up with another young girl like me, someone who didn't know any better. I just hope she didn't get the chance to act out whatever twisted fantasy she had in her head. It still gives me chills when I think about it. Maybe it doesn't sound terrifying to everyone, but the way she described what she wanted to do, how it sounded like she wanted to hurt me, it was disturbing on such a deep level. She was definitely dangerous, and I'm just relieved I saw the signs before anything happened. I can't even imagine what could have gone down if I had met her in person. Hey Reddit, I've got a story from when I was 21 that might be a bit of a wild ride. I'm not exactly the most charming guy, so dating has always been a bit of a struggle for me. Eventually, I found myself on Tinder. For the first couple of months, it was pretty much a dud. Then, out of the blue, a woman named Emily, who had blonde hair, messaged me. She was cute, but I honestly thought she was a bot. 3 days later, she messaged me again, which seemed unusual because bots usually don't message more than once. I decided to check out her profile, and it seemed pretty average, but definitely not bot-like. We ended up chatting for about a month, and one day, she suggested I come visit her. She lived around 7 hours away by car, and I was pretty hesitant, but I really liked her, so I was tempted. After some back and forth, I agreed to make the drive. At that point, I trusted that she was real. We'd been video chatting every other week and calling almost daily, so I thought I was in the clear. But things started getting a bit strange during the drive. Emily kept texting me, asking where I was and if I was still coming. If I took more than 30 minutes to reply, she'd send a bunch of anxious messages. I figured she was just nervous, which I could understand. Finding her place was a bit of a challenge. Her directions were kind of confusing, and it was tucked away behind some gravel roads and a lot of trees. It was around noon when I finally arrived at an old house. One of the upstairs windows was boarded up, but it didn't seem abandoned, just in need of some TLC. Her red car, which she had mentioned, was parked in the driveway. I texted her to let her know I had arrived, and she replied with just a smiley face. When I got out of my car and headed to the door, I noticed someone watching me from one of the upstairs windows. It felt a bit unsettling, but I figured it was probably her dad or someone. She had mentioned he visits sometimes, so I brushed it off and knocked on the door. Emily answered with a big smile and even gave me a kiss, which threw me off a bit. We went inside and sat down on her couch. I brought up her dad and asked if he was around. Emily looked puzzled and said her dad wasn't there. I thought maybe she was just playing along, so I told her I'd seen someone watching me from the window. So Emily went totally pale and said we needed to leave immediately. We both bolted to our cars, and when I asked her what was going on, she told me that her dad wasn't actually there, and that she'd been alone the entire day until I arrived. I quickly called the police, and while I was giving them the address, Emily gasped and pointed at the same window where I'd seen the figure earlier. He was peering at us again. I could see him more clearly this time. He looked pretty old and frail, like he hadn't eaten in days. As soon as he saw us looking back, he disappeared from the window. The police took about 30 minutes to show up, and during that time, Emily was crying and going on about how stupid she felt for not locking the doors. When the officers finally arrived, one of them started asking us questions while the other two checked out the house. They came back later and said they hadn't found anyone, but they did notice that the back door was wide open. Whoever had been there must have run off into the woods. The cops were pretty sure the house was empty, though. After they left, Emily asked if I could stay the night because she was too scared to be alone. I agreed, and we ended up crashing on the couch downstairs since her bedroom was too close to where the man had been. Emily also brought out a shotgun her dad had given her but that she had never used. I told her it was probably fine, but she insisted, saying it would make her feel safer. I was glad she did. Later that night, I was still awake, watching TV while Emily somehow managed to fall asleep. I heard the sound of the kitchen door handle turning. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was just really annoyed. I turned on the kitchen light, grabbed the shotgun, and pointed it at the door. There he was again. The same guy from earlier, standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I was relieved we had locked it. As soon as he saw me, he bolted into the woods again. I woke Emily up, told her what happened, and called the police for the second time. They came back, searched the woods, and found nothing. They suggested it would be best if we stayed somewhere else for the night. We said our goodbyes, and Emily went to stay at a friend's house while I headed home. I left shortly after Emily and was chatting with my brother on the phone about the night's events. My headlights were on, and as I was talking, I saw him again. That creepy guy was standing by the corner of Emily's house, just watching me. I sped off without calling the police again, but texted Emily to let her know. I don't think Emily ever went back to that house alone after that. I never imagined I'd be the type of girl to meet up with someone I swiped right on, but there I was, standing outside a shady-looking apartment, feeling this mix of thrill and anxiety. His photos made him look ridiculously attractive, and after texting for a few weeks, I figured I knew him enough. When I got there, I saw a party in full swing. I wasn't even supposed to be on dating apps at 17, but I'd lied about my age. All my friends were on there too, so I figured, what's the harm? The second I stepped inside, though, the excitement vanished. Someone asked who I was, and I gave my fake name, Maya. That's when Sam, the guy I'd been talking to, came over with 2 beers in hand and said hi. He insisted I take one. Up close, he looked way older than in his pictures, and it instantly set off alarm bells. I turned down the drink. The room was packed with men, and they were all much older, maybe around 25 on average. The whole vibe of the place was off, completely different from what I imagined. The guys were loud, playing some drinking game, and the energy felt wrong. I wanted to leave, but Sam and his friends started pushing me to hang out. I was feeling more trapped by the minute, unsure what to do. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted another girl, close to my age, looking just as out of place as I felt. It was like we both understood right away that we were in some kind of trouble, and she looked like she had already been through something bad. I walked over to her, and she immediately said she wanted to leave as soon as she arrived. She thought she was just meeting a guy, like me. Turns out, we both thought we were meeting Sam, and luckily, he wasn't paying us much attention anymore, which was probably for the best. We started planning our escape, waiting for the right moment when no one would notice. Even though we didn't know each other, we stuck together, hoping we'd be safer that way. That's when things got really ugly. 2 of the older guys suddenly became super aggressive, trying to force us into one of the bedrooms and shoving drinks at us. It was clear at that point, we were in real danger. The only option left was to run. Out of nowhere, Sam stepped in and told them to back off. For a second, it seemed like he was helping us, but I still didn't trust him. Luckily, the guys who had been harassing us went outside for a smoke or something. We saw that as our chance. We bolted. As soon as we were out, we called the police, breathing hard, our hands shaking. It became obvious we were part of some twisted setup. We jumped into my car and sped off, not stopping until we parked 2 miles down the road, in an empty lot, where we just hugged each other in relief. It was like we couldn't believe we actually got away from there. The guys had known from the moment we walked in that we weren't there for the right reasons, but they didn't care. They saw how uncomfortable we were, and didn't care about that either. I don't even want to imagine what could have happened if we hadn't trusted our gut and stuck together. Meeting someone off a dating app like that? Biggest mistake of my life. I'll never put myself in that kind of risk again. It was a brutal lesson about the dangers of online dating, and I'm just grateful we made it out of that nightmare. At the time, I was casually dating, and I had some strange experiences, but this one stood out the most. The guy wasn't someone I knew. He was a friend my brother had run into a few times at a coffee shop. He was new to the country, and my brother was sort of helping him settle in. Feeling like I was running out of options myself, I agreed when my brother set us up on a date. But man, this one ended up being a nightmare. We arranged to meet at a local diner, and he showed up about 20 minutes late. Normally, I wouldn't make a big deal out of it, so I brushed it off. We sat down, and I tried to stay optimistic. Right away, I could tell I wasn't into him. Still, I wanted to be nice, so I figured I'd see how things went. At first, he seemed like a gentleman, opening the door for me, pulling out my chair. Not necessary, but okay, nice enough. While waiting to order, I skimmed the menu when he randomly started talking about how much his ex-fiancée would have loved this place. That threw me off, so I asked him about her. He said he had left her behind when he moved here. When I asked why, his response was, "Well, we didn't really break up. I just got tired of her complaining, so I left." That felt off to me, but I didn't want to push the conversation, so I awkwardly switched the topic, trying to learn more about him. He wasn't exactly chatty, though. I struggled to keep the conversation going. Thankfully, the server came over to take our order. It's important to mention that our server had an accent that wasn't common in that area. My date just stared blankly for a moment before asking me, "You can understand him?" I nodded, feeling embarrassed, and went ahead to place our orders. As soon as the server left, my date leaned in and said, "I wouldn't normally let the woman order. But you know, that guy talked weird. I didn't get it." I was floored. In a single sentence, he managed to be both sexist and offensive. I was speechless for a few seconds before I got mad. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something like, "Well, I can order just fine, and what was with the weird comment?" He got defensive right away, claiming he wasn't being rude, just unfamiliar with people like that, back where he came from. I pointed out that he wouldn't have even met me if he stuck to only the people from his home country. He backed down after that and tried to smooth things over by saying he was glad he met me. But honestly, by that point, the date had taken such a bizarre turn that I was just ready to leave. Still, I figured since we already ordered, I might as well stay and eat. Maybe salvage what was left of the evening before I made my escape, and for sure, never see this guy again. So, I answered his basic questions, the usual small talk stuff. But then, out of nowhere, he started asking me about my past relationships, whether I was still a virgin, and if I'd be willing to wait until marriage to sleep with someone. Oh, and if I'd be okay with being a submissive wife. That's when it hit me. I was probably sitting across from some religious nutjob. His creepy comments, old-school views on women, and all the other awkwardness suddenly made sense. So I just hit him with a simple, "None of your business." "I'm leaving now." I quickly glanced at the menu, dropped enough cash on the table to cover my half of the bill plus a tip, and got ready to leave. Of course, he didn't take it well. He looked genuinely confused, asking why I was overreacting like this had been a perfectly fine date. Then he told me he couldn't accept my money, claiming it was an insult. "All right, dude, if you want to pay for a dinner that no one's eating, go right ahead." I picked my money back up and walked out without looking back. I thought that was the end of it, just a bad date I could laugh about later. But on my way home, my phone started buzzing. It was my brother, asking where I was. Apparently my date had called him, crying, saying I'd left without any explanation and that he was really worried about me. Luckily, my brother didn't buy into it and guessed I had a good reason for leaving early. When I filled him in on what actually went down, he was just as surprised as I was. After that night, we decided to cut all ties with this guy. My brother stopped hanging out with him, and we both blocked him on social media. For a while, it seemed like that was the end of it. But soon enough, he started blowing up my brother's phone with weird, frantic texts. One minute saying he was worried about me, the next hoping something terrible would happen to me. Then came the fake social media accounts. He'd make endless new profiles just to send us disturbing messages. He'd post long, rambling descriptions of me, then go on to call me every name in the book. We kept blocking each one, and eventually just tried to move on from the whole mess. Things started to get way worse after that. One day, he somehow figured out where I lived. I'm not sure if he followed me, or if he got my address from someone else, but either way, he just showed up outside my place. He was standing there, asking to come in so we could talk. I refused, obviously, but when I tried to go inside, he grabbed my arm and wouldn't let go. He kept going on about how no one would ever love me like he did, and that if I left him again, I'd regret it when I was old and alone. He just wouldn't stop talking, and I was struggling to pull my arm free. Finally, I'd had enough. I yelled at him to let me go, kicked him hard in the shin, and he finally released me. Of course, he wasn't happy about it, calling me ungrateful and acting like he was the victim. I took the chance to run inside and lock the door behind me. He started pounding on the door, trying to push his way in, and at this point, I was freaking out. I grabbed my phone and called the police, telling them someone was trying to break into my house. They told me help was on the way, but after 20 or 30 minutes, there was still no sign of anyone. I was getting more and more scared because he was still slamming into the door, and I was terrified the lock would give way. Desperate, I called my brother, who lived nearby. I wasn't sure what he could do, but I knew he would come. About 15 minutes later, he showed up. I could hear them arguing outside, but I couldn't make out what was being said. A few minutes after that, it went quiet, so I texted my brother, asking if it was safe to come out. He didn't respond, but soon after, the police arrived. That's when I finally stepped outside. Apparently, after I called, one of my neighbors had also called the police to report two guys fighting on my lawn. It must have been my brother and the creep, because my brother looked out of breath, and the guy was nowhere to be seen. The police talked to my brother, and he explained that he had tried to stop the guy from breaking into my house, but then the guy had punched him. I told the police my side of things, and a couple of my neighbors were also asked to share what they saw. There were even marks on the door from where he'd been trying to force his way in. The police went out looking for him, and a few weeks later they called me, saying they thought they'd found him. But when they showed me the suspect, it wasn't him. After that, I never heard from the police again, and honestly, I've never seen the guy since. It's been about 15 years now, and while I feel like I'm probably safe, I still hope I never see him again. I'm a 26-year-old woman, and it's been a long time since I dated anyone. I don't really go out much, but I recently relocated to a different town. I've been feeling isolated from not knowing anyone around, and work friendships haven't really developed yet, so I decided to try some dating apps like Bumble and Tinder. After swiping through profiles for a few days, I finally matched with a guy. He seemed great, handsome, had a stable job, shared some of my interests, and he was also 26. Looking back, I should have been more cautious. We chatted for about a week before exchanging phone numbers. We discussed all sorts of things, work, life, and he was incredibly kind. He reassured me that moving to a new place could be hard, but that taking small steps, like putting myself out there, was brave and the right thing to do. There was a weird moment though. He randomly asked me what kind of underwear I had on. I wasn't ready for that kind of talk and told him so. He immediately apologized, saying it was inappropriate, and I didn't think much more about it. After another week of talking, he suggested meeting up in person. He made it clear that he wanted to meet somewhere public so I'd feel safe. He offered to take me out for dinner, and if things were going well, we could grab a drink afterward. It sounded fun. The only odd part was where he wanted to meet, outside a dive shop. I found that a little weird, but I brushed it off. The weather here isn't cold, even though it's winter, so I figured he just picked a convenient spot. Plus, it was close to a busy park, so there were plenty of people around. When I got there, I saw him chatting with a couple of people. I walked over, and as soon as he saw me, I gave him a hug. Not super romantic, but friendly. However, he barely hugged me back, just awkwardly placing his hands on my back like he was uncomfortable. He smiled, but it was brief, followed by a flat, "How are you?" I tried to stay positive, told him he looked even better in person, and mentioned how happy I was that he asked me out. I was feeling super uneasy. His eyes went wide, and he turned to his friends, the ones he'd been talking to, and asked them if they set him up. They all just shook their heads, completely serious. Then he looked at me, asking who told me to do this. I was baffled. I explained that we'd been chatting on Tinder for a week. He stared at me like I was from another planet and said he didn't even have Tinder, then pulled out his phone to show me there was no app on it. He apologized, saying it was a weird misunderstanding. I showed him the profile, and he looked just as lost as I felt. Embarrassed, I mumbled something, then turned and headed back to my car. I felt like such a fool. But just as I was walking away, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the number I'd been texting, and it simply said, "Ha ha ha." My stomach dropped. I tried calling the number, but it was already disconnected. By the time I made it home, the whole profile was gone. I immediately blocked the number, not wanting to deal with any more of this madness. Later, I decided to reverse search some of the photos the profile had sent me. It didn't take long to find out who the guy actually was. Turns out, he was a few years older than the age on his fake profile, and his real name wasn't even close to what he had told me. I also discovered he worked as a dive instructor at the shop where we met. The whole thing felt like a violation, like I'd been tricked in the worst way possible. I ended up messaging the real guy, explaining everything. I kept it as short as possible, telling him about the fake profile and why I had approached him like that. Surprisingly, he replied. He was apologetic and said he had no clue what was going on either. He even offered to take me out for a drink to make up for the awkward situation. But honestly, after that whole experience, my trust was completely shattered. There was no way I could ever go out again after what happened. I started trying out dating apps a few months back. What I didn't expect was that my first experience would be enough to make me swear off meeting anyone from these platforms forever. I'm 25 now, and just average. Not the most attractive guy around, not fit either. I'm a bit of a geek too. The only thing that works in my favor is that I make a stable income. It's not like I'm rolling in cash, but enough to pay bills and live comfortably. I've only been in one serious relationship, and being single at my age makes me feel like a failure sometimes. Friends and family are always on my case about going out and living more. I hate to admit it, but I'm still a virgin, and my buddies won't let me hear the end of it. They joke about it every time we hang out, which I know is all in good fun, but it always stings a little. I matched with a girl named Bella, and we messaged back and forth for a few weeks. We started talking on the phone and even swapped some Snapchats before planning to meet. Eventually, I asked if she'd want to hang out in person. She hesitated at first, but agreed after some convincing. She sent me the address later that night, and I arrived around 8:30. I was pretty nervous. It was my first time meeting someone from an app, and I really wanted things to go smoothly. I picked her up and we grabbed some dinner. I covered the bill. At first, it was awkward. We didn't really click immediately, but after a few drinks, we both loosened up, and it became easier to talk. Toward the end of the night, I asked if she wanted to do something else, but she said she had an early morning ahead and couldn't stay out too late. However, she suggested we hang out again at my place in a few days, offering to cook and watch movies together. That sounded like the perfect plan to me. So I dropped her off that night, and a few days later, she came over. This time she drove herself instead of me picking her up, and we both had the next day off from work. Everything felt like it was lining up perfectly. Bella showed up around 6:30 in the evening. After some small talk, we started making dinner together. It didn't take long before we cracked open the drinks. I started with just a couple of beers, but Bella was hitting the harder stuff pretty early on. At one point, she suggested I switch to the liquor she brought since she didn't want to drink alone. I hesitated but took a couple of shots anyway. That's when things took a strange turn. 10 minutes later, I felt completely out of it. Way more than usual. I'm not one to get tipsy that fast, but everything started spinning. I couldn't even focus enough to hold a simple conversation. The last thing I remember before blacking out was Bella laughing, though I had no idea what was so funny. Next thing I knew, I woke up on my couch with a pounding headache. My breath was heavy, and I felt disoriented. Something was wrong. I staggered to my feet, trying to figure out what had happened. The living room was trashed, and the front door was wide open. Panic set in as I realized Bella was nowhere to be found. I looked around, and it was clear I'd been robbed. My TVs were missing, my handgun was gone, and even some cash I'd hidden in my room was missing. They'd even taken some of my designer clothes. Altogether, I'd lost over $3,000 worth of stuff. I felt like an idiot for letting this happen. The first thing I did was try to message Bella on Tinder, but I was already blocked. I called and texted her, but it was the same story. That's when the full weight of what just happened hit me. I was beyond angry and didn't know what else to do but call the police. But I knew deep down that Bella probably wasn't even her real name. They couldn't find her on social media, and the address she'd given me? Fake. The police knocked on the door she'd told me she lived at, but the guy who answered had no idea who she was. He said no one by that name lived there. Without more information or a warrant, there wasn't much they could do. And that was that. I've been beating myself up over it ever since, and I swear I'll never go near a dating app again. First time posting here. I've been lurking for a while, reading tons of stories, and I'm hooked on this subreddit. Something I saw recently brought up a memory of mine that I figured I'd share. It's not as wild as some of the stuff on here, but it still creeps me out to this day. So, a few years back, one of my buddies, Paul, got a match on Tinder. But instead of being into him, The girl says she finds the guy in his group photo attractive instead. That guy happened to be our friend, Alex. So, naturally, Paul hits up Alex, thinking it'd be hilarious to play matchmaker. We all thought it was a pretty funny way to set someone up. Things go as you'd expect for a Tinder hookup. Alex and the girl meet up for drinks, hit it off, and end up back at his place. I remember warning Alex beforehand that the girl seemed a little off, but nothing too crazy. Just enough to make me go, weird vibe. So, they're making out. And that's when things start to get strange. She suddenly gets super pushy and tells Alex to squeeze her chest, but not gently. She wanted him to do it hard, like painfully hard. Alex is already feeling uncomfortable, but he tries to go along with it. Only it's not enough for her. She keeps demanding more, telling him to hurt her, and even gets mad when he doesn't do it as aggressively as she wants. At this point, Alex is freaked out. He tries to go with it for a while, but eventually he just stops. The whole thing fizzles out, and the hookup ends. She wasn't exactly thrilled, but she didn't flip out or anything, just kind of stormed off. Alex made it clear after that he wasn't interested in seeing her again. She didn't go full stalker mode or anything, but she did keep texting Alex for a while, like she couldn't take the hint. After a bit, he blocked her, and we didn't hear anything from her for maybe a month or so. We laughed it off as just a weird hookup, thinking it was all behind us. But that's where things got even more messed up, and it somehow dragged me into the whole thing. So, one night, I'm sitting in my room and I get a match on Tinder. As soon as I saw her profile, I got this weird gut feeling, like I knew her from somewhere. Keep in mind, I only saw a few pictures of her back when Alex had his run-in with her. Still, something about her face looked familiar. Right away, her messages were super forward, way too sexual for someone I hadn't even talked to yet. My instincts were screaming at me that something wasn't right. She didn't even try to make small talk or anything, just jumped straight into talking about meeting up and hooking up, skipping all the usual first date stuff. Then, she sends me a message asking if I live at, get this, my actual freaking address. My heart dropped. I had no clue how she could know where I lived. Completely freaked out, I had no idea how to respond. I'm sitting there, staring at my phone, trying to process it when I suddenly realize who this girl is. I took some screenshots of the chat and sent them over to Alex. He looked at them and confirmed it was the same girl from his Tinder nightmare. At this point, we were both like, what the hell? We had a couple of panicked conversations about what to do before I decided to just block her and not engage. It didn't escalate into anything like stalking or worse, thankfully. But even now, I still wonder what her deal was. Was she trying to get back at Alex by messing with his friends? Or was she just completely unhinged? Honestly, it's one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me. And after reading all these stories here, I look back on it differently. It wasn't just a weird encounter. It was the start of what could have been a full-blown stalker situation. Maybe she was dangerous. I'm just relieved we never had to find out. My name's Jamie, and I'm 22 now. But this all happened when I was 18. I met this guy named Rick on Tinder. He seemed all right, just normal stuff through texts and a couple of phone calls. I know I should have asked to video call him, but I didn't. Go ahead, judge me in the comments. I'd never had a weird online thing happen before, and I really didn't think I'd get caught up in something sketchy. Rick invited me over one Saturday night after he finished work. We'd only been chatting for a few days, but I didn't mind too much. The thing was, I wasn't looking for a hookup. And yeah, I know some of you will get that. It's tricky trying to figure out if a guy just wants to get you in bed or is genuinely interested. Let's be real though. Most guys, like 80%, are after one thing, even if they seem nice. That's just how things work nowadays. I was fine with that, but hoped Rick wasn't just trying to be some player. I figured maybe we could hang out, get to know each other, and see where it led. Rick's Tinder pics were pretty typical. Some outdoorsy ones, him holding a fish, that sort of thing. Not that it mattered much, but we both talked about church a bit, and that made me feel a little safer. Looking back, he probably just used that to lower my guard. It was a 15-minute drive to his place, so not far. I showed up around 11:15. The neighborhood was really quiet, with just a few houses that looked occupied. His place was dark, except for a porch light. None of my friends or family knew I was meeting Rick, but before heading up to the door, I shot a text to my brother, telling him I was on a Tinder date, and shared the address just in case. My nerves were kicking in as I walked up to the house. I sent Rick a message saying I'd arrived, and noticed the little notification bubble on Tinder. It showed up red, but I ignored it. I knocked on the door once, but no one answered. I knocked again. Still nothing. That sinking feeling hit me hard, so I went back to my car, thinking maybe I had the wrong place. Just as I was about to leave, a message popped up from Rick. He laughed, saying I knocked on the wrong door and that he could see me. 2 houses down. The address Rick gave me led me to the wrong door. You know how sometimes your GPS freaks out and gets a little confused? That's what happened. I glanced at the house number I was standing at, and sure enough, it didn't match the one Rick had texted. So, I started walking toward the right place. There was a green Pontiac in the driveway, just like he'd said. The porch light was on, along with the living room light. As I got about halfway there, the light inside switched off. I stopped at the edge of the driveway, taking a second to look around. If things went south, there weren't many places to run. Before I could think too much, my phone buzzed again with a message from Rick. "You coming?" Followed by a laughing emoji. That struck me as off. It just felt weird. But I kept walking. When I got close enough, I saw the front door was cracked open, but the storm door was shut. It was way too dark to see anything inside. I stood there, frozen, my gut screaming at me to turn around. That's when I got one last message from him. "It's unlocked." Right then, I knew something was wrong. My legs moved before I even thought about it. I started back toward my car. I made it to the door when I heard a girl's voice behind me, coming from the house. She sounded about my age. I turned, and sure enough, there she was, leaning out the door with a seltzer in hand, asking, "You coming in?" Everything about it screamed danger. I told her I was good, got into my car, and drove off. Rick had mentioned he lived alone. So who the hell was that? My brain was flashing warning signs, and I wasn't about to wait and find out. As I headed home, I checked Tinder. Rick had blocked me. No explanation, no message, just gone. That was all I needed to confirm something was off. A normal guy wouldn't act like that. And even if he wasn't a total catfish, the whole situation felt wrong. None of my friends in the area had ever seen or heard of him. It felt like there was something darker going on beneath the surface. Whether I was overthinking it or not didn't matter. When your gut is screaming at you to get out, it's not worth ignoring. A few days later, I got a random text from Rick, apologizing and asking if I wanted to try again. I didn't even respond. My friend Taylor suggested we look up his number, just out of curiosity. When we did, it came back to a 27-year-old named Marcos. That pretty much confirmed my suspicions. I was 100% getting catfished. Looking back, the girl with the drink trying to lure me in was the final straw. Whatever they had planned, I'm just glad I didn't stick around to find out. A while back, I decided it was time to put myself out there again, not necessarily looking for a serious relationship, but I needed a change from the usual bar scene. So, like many single girls around, I downloaded a dating app. I started chatting with a bunch of people online, which helped boost my confidence to actually go on a few dates here and there. Most of the conversations didn't lead to meeting up in person, but there were a few that did. However, none of those first dates went anywhere. Except one. That one was different, and not in a good way. I came across this guy named Chris. He seemed nice enough, so we made plans to have dinner. Chris suggested a fancy restaurant halfway between us, but on the day of our date, he didn't answer his phone, completely ghosting me. The next day, he messaged, saying he got caught up at work and forgot his phone at home. I wasn't really buying it, but when he asked to reschedule, for some reason, I agreed. It was probably a dumb decision. So the new date rolls around, and this time Chris asked me to meet him at his house, where he'll drive us to the restaurant. He mentioned about 3 times to come hungry, like he was really emphasizing how big the portions were going to be. Now, I'm not a fan of meeting someone for the first time at their house or getting into their car, but we'd been talking for over a week, and I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. As I got closer to his place, though, he called me and asked if I could park in a lot a little down the street from his house. Seemed odd, but I thought maybe his driveway was just too small. The weird thing was, I hadn't told him what kind of car I drove. Yet, as I pulled into the parking lot, he texted me saying he was parked a couple of spaces over. That was my first red flag. Against my better judgment, I got into his car, and we started heading off to the restaurant. Now, I didn't know this town too well, but I had a general idea of where the restaurant was, and it shouldn't have taken more than 10 minutes to get there. Yet, here we were, driving for almost 25 minutes down some sketchy back road. I finally turned to him and asked, "Where exactly are we going?" That's when he dropped the first weird bomb. Apparently, when he tried to book the reservation, it took multiple calls to get through. And when someone finally answered, they told him they'd changed locations. My stomach sank when I realized we had already passed the intersection he was describing at least 5 minutes earlier. Then, I noticed something even stranger. He didn't have the restaurant address plugged into his GPS. The GPS was on, sure, but no destination was set. Red flag number 2. So, I quietly pulled up my own GPS, typed in the restaurant's name, and it told me the place was closed. Red flag number 3. At this point, I know I should have left, but I stuck around. We ended up chatting more, trying to get to know each other. But honestly, the whole thing felt off. When he couldn't find the restaurant, he brushed it off and said, "Don't worry, I've got another spot in mind." Then, he drove us even deeper into the middle of nowhere, finally stopping at this random trailhead in the woods. He said we'd have to walk the rest of the way and claimed we were going stargazing. The spot itself was nice, I won't lie, but the way we got there was super creepy. As we made our way through the woods, he kept making weird jokes about not being a serial killer, and then made me promise I wasn't going to steal his keys and leave him stranded there. Yeah, like that's reassuring. The whole night was filled with little lies, and I didn't know what to make of it. He'd tell these drawn-out, detailed stories, only to end them with, "Just kidding, that didn't happen." Like at first, it was kind of funny when he tried to convince me he got so drunk in college that he ended up getting a piercing in a very sensitive area, but after a while, it just got weird. I realized I didn't actually know anything real about him, and I couldn't tell when he was being serious. On the way back, we talked about maybe watching a movie at his place, but out of nowhere, he changed his mind and pulled the car over in front of some random park. He said he'd rather hang out there, and then started daring me to do weird stuff like run naked through the park. He also started asking bizarrely personal, overly sexual questions, not in a fun or flirty way, but like he was digging for something specific. And then it got even weirder. Out of the blue, he demanded to know if I was going to kiss him by the end of the night. He made this whole production of needing to put on chapstick first. I don't know why, but I went along with it and started looking through my purse for chapstick. Meanwhile, he sat there in the driver's seat, licking his lips and, not so subtly, rubbing himself through his pants. Yeah, I definitely saw it. I told him I didn't have any chapstick, hoping that would end it, but he just shrugged and said, "That's fine. Why don't you crawl over here and show me what you got?" He started patting his lap, making it obvious what he wanted. I told him I wasn't comfortable with that, but he reached around, trying to pull me onto his lap by grabbing at my waist. I pushed him off, making it clear I wasn't going to sleep with him, especially on a first date. He acted like that was fine, but then he grabbed my hand, trying to drag it toward his lap, saying, "How about just a quick preview?" At this point, I was furious. This was the same guy who had spent days going on about how much he hated men who pressured women, and how he could never understand why someone would force themselves on anyone. It was like a complete 180 from everything he'd said before. I told him flat out that pushing me wasn't going to make me more willing, and reminded him he'd been talking all night about being a gentleman. But instead of backing off, things just got worse. He smirked and said, "I think you're just scared of how big it is. But don't worry. There are other ways to please me if that's the case." Again, he tried to pull my hand into his lap, but I jerked it away and told him it wasn't happening. He just sulked, like a little kid who didn't get his way, while I sat there desperately trying to come up with an excuse to get him to take me back to my car. Then, out of nowhere, he pulled out his phone and opened a text message. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I saw the conversation. He had sent the last 3 messages. After staring at his phone for a second, he turned to me and said, "Oh, I just got a text from my uncle. Something's going on at the house, and I need to get back ASAP." By this point, I was completely done. But what really pissed me off was the obvious lie. If he wasn't enjoying the date, he could have just asked to end it early. There was no need to come up with some ridiculous excuse. It was so clear he was just making things up as he went along. And for what? Why act like he was one person, then flip into someone completely different? To top it all off, when he finally dropped me off at my car, it was in a pitch-dark parking lot, after midnight. He didn't even wait for me to get to my car before driving off. The whole experience was a nightmare. Of course, there wasn't going to be a second date, but the real kicker. A few days later, I happened to drive by the restaurant's old location. It was still there, right off the highway, and it hadn't moved at all. And, as it turns out, his house was only about 2 minutes down the road from it. So now I'm left wondering, where the hell was he actually trying to take me? After breaking up with someone I'd been with for almost 5 years, I was in a weird place. We were on the verge of moving in together, maybe even getting engaged, but things just fell apart. It took me months to feel normal again, to get my life back on track. Once I did, my friends started pushing me to get back into the dating scene. Honestly, I wasn't interested at all. I didn't want anything serious or even casual, but my friends kept at it. They said I needed to at least go on some dates just to get used to being out there again. I wasn't too keen on the idea, but after some convincing, I downloaded a dating app. After a bit of swiping, I matched with this girl who was home for the summer from college. She lived a bit farther than I would have liked, but she seemed excited to meet, and even offered to come to my area. I wasn't into it, if I'm being real, but my friends insisted. "It's just a date, not a commitment," they'd say. So, whatever, I agreed to meet her for lunch at a sports bar that week. I made sure to be upfront with her from the beginning. I told her I wasn't looking for anything serious, or even a relationship at all. I explained that I'd just gotten out of something long-term and was only here because my friends wouldn't leave me alone about it. She still wanted to meet, so we set up a casual lunch. The day we met, she was already waiting at the bar when I arrived. Right off the bat, I noticed she looked pretty different from her photos. Not to be shallow, but it was obvious that the pictures she had on the app were at least 6 or 7 years old. I could tell because she had tattoos in person that weren't there in her pics. It threw me off, but I told myself I was there for the experience, not to find the love of my life or anything. She was super shy and awkward the whole time. Her hands were even shaking when she reached for her drink, which was kind of sweet in a way. I tried to help her relax by asking her some easy questions: where she grew up, what kind of music she liked, where she went to school, stuff like that. But all I got were short, one-word answers, and I could feel the conversation stalling right out of the gate. It dragged on like that for almost an hour. No matter how hard I tried, she wasn't really giving me anything to work with. But I could tell she was nervous, and I've been there before, so I was patient. Then out of nowhere, she pulls out this book and hands it to me saying, "I got this for you." I was a little surprised, but thanked her and asked what it was about. I figured, hey, if someone's going to recommend me a book, I'm cool with that. But she gave me this weird look and said, "Are you serious? You're joking, right?" At this point, I was super confused. I just stared at her, unsure what she was getting at. Then she says, "This is your favorite book. You told me this was your favorite." I blinked a few times and said, No, I've never even heard of this book before." Turns out, she had mixed me up with some other guy she'd been talking to online. I found the whole thing pretty funny, honestly. She was embarrassed, though, and I tried to make light of it, saying it's no big deal. I get it. Dating apps can get confusing sometimes. After we finished our lunch, the conversation was still rough. She was giving me those same one-word replies, and I was starting to get the hint that maybe it was time to wrap things up. I casually mentioned that I needed to head home soon to take care of my pets and get some laundry done. But then she got super insistent about wanting to hang out longer, asking if we could do something else. I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed, thinking, what's the harm? We ended up walking to a nearby park. That's when things took a seriously strange turn. We found a bench to sit on. It was still daylight, kids were playing basketball not far off, and people were jogging by. The whole thing seemed normal enough. I tried once more to start a conversation, but she still wasn't saying much, just those frustrating one-word answers. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, she leans in and kisses me. But it wasn't a gentle kiss. This was full-on, aggressive, tongue-involved action. I was completely caught off guard. I just sat there, frozen in place, totally stunned. Here was this shy girl who had barely spoken the whole time, suddenly kissing me like we were in some over-the-top movie scene. It was such a weird contrast to how nervous she'd been earlier, practically shaking at lunch. Now she was practically attacking my face. I had no idea how to react. My mind was racing, and it felt like the kiss went on forever. I just wanted it to stop, but I was too freaked out to move or say anything. What are you even supposed to do in a situation like that? I was praying she'd notice my body language, how I wasn't into it at all. I had no idea how to handle it, to be honest. And right then, as if things couldn't get weirder, this gross dude walks by, staring and yelling out creepy stuff at us. He even tried to suggest a threesome. I was just sitting there like, what the actual hell is happening? I wanted to disappear. I was beyond uncomfortable, and the whole scene felt unreal. I finally got the guy to leave after telling him no about 100 times. Meanwhile, she was just sitting there, laughing like the whole thing was some kind of joke. I couldn't believe it. Like, who is this person? One minute she's shy and barely talking, and the next she's all over me and laughing at this random creeper hitting on us. Once the guy left, I stood up and said I really needed to head home. I thought that was clear enough, but she ignored me and got in my face again, asking, "Did you like that? Do you think I'm sexy? Do you want me?" I could feel the anxiety creeping in again, so I told her, "I really have to go." Then she asked, "Can I come with you?" I firmly told her no, but she kept pushing. I had to say no several times before she finally let it go. I got back home, feeling super unsettled by the whole thing. I hadn't been on a date in a long time, but something about this just felt off. A bit later, she texted me, asking if I wanted to go out again. I was trying to be nice, so I told her she seemed like a cool person, and that I appreciated the time we spent, which was a lie. But I also made it clear, again, that I wasn't feeling any connection, and reminded her that I wasn't looking for anything serious. Then came the flood of texts. She couldn't understand why I didn't want to see her again, and kept saying she thought I was really into her, which was wild because I couldn't have been clearer. I didn't reply to any of her messages at that point. I figured I had already said my piece and didn't want to fuel the fire. But the texts kept coming, one after another, like we had just ended some long-term relationship or something. It didn't stop at texts either. She started calling me non-stop, and I eventually had to block her number. So yeah, to the nightmare girl I met on that app, let's never meet again, ever. I had just gotten out of a long relationship and thought some casual dating would be a good way to shake things up, so I hopped on Tinder. I was upfront with everyone I matched with. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just some light dates, maybe dinner or a night at a bar. That's how I came across this guy. Let's call him Alex. He'd just moved to my city and wasn't interested in any big commitment either. He said he was just hoping to meet people and explore the area a bit. For our first meetup, I picked a popular bar I liked. I knew a couple of the bartenders and some of the waitstaff, so it felt like a safe choice for meeting someone new. Alex showed up on time, which was a good sign. He seemed really laid back and easy to talk to. We chatted about work, and he mentioned he was a software developer who recently went freelance. We also talked about his new living situation. He was sharing a house with some friends, which made sense because this city isn't cheap. When he asked where I lived, I told him I was lucky enough to have my own one-bedroom apartment in a nice part of town, mostly thanks to my parents helping me with the deposit money back when I turned 22. They gave me some funds, and I'd invested it well enough to afford my place. After our night was wrapping up, Alex offered to drive me home. but I declined. I preferred to take an Uber by myself. He joked, asking if it was because I had plans with someone else after our date. I laughed it off, thinking he was just being playful. A few days later, Alex messaged me, saying he couldn't stop thinking about me and wanted to hang out again. It felt fast, but I didn't mind seeing him one more time. We met at a different spot, another place I chose because I knew the owner from school and was familiar with the staff. This restaurant was a bit fancier than the first, and I noticed he got irritated when I ordered a bit more food than usual. It confused me because I'd offered to pay for myself both times, so it shouldn't have been a big deal to him. Once again, at the end of the night, he offered to give me a ride home. I said no, just like before. While we were talking about it, he got a phone call and stepped away to answer. Even though he tried to be discreet, I overheard part of his conversation. He was saying, "Nah, I think I'll stay with her again tonight. Yeah, I'm with her right now. Don't worry about it. I'll be home soon." I figured he was talking to his roommate, or maybe a family member, but I didn't ask. He came back to the table, smiling. "Seriously, I insist on driving you home. It's late, and you never know what can happen with an Uber. I'd feel a lot better knowing you got home safely." I was too tired to argue at that point, so I just gave in and put my address into his GPS. As soon as I got home that night, Alex texted me, saying he'd be picking me up the next morning for a picnic. I told him I had a lot to do around the apartment, but he didn't back down, saying he'd be there at 10 a.m. Sure enough, the next morning at 10 on the dot, he was parked outside my building. I got into his car, and when he leaned in to kiss my cheek, I immediately noticed his breath smelled awful. I tried not to let it show, but it was pretty gross. Despite that, the picnic itself wasn't bad. We sat by a small lake, and the weather was nice. Throughout the day, he kept trying to kiss me, but I dodged it every time, pretending to be distracted or busy with something else. By around 4 p.m., I was ready to head home. The park we were at was a good hour-and-a-half drive from my place, so getting an Uber wasn't really an option unless I wanted to spend a ridiculous amount of money. He agreed it was time to leave, and we headed back. At some point during the drive, I dozed off. When I woke up, Alex suggested we finish off the bottle of bubbly we'd bought earlier at my apartment. I told him I wasn't really feeling it, and that's when his whole vibe changed. He raised his voice a bit and said, "What's going on with you? Why are you so determined to keep me out of your place? Just tell me what's up." His sudden shift caught me off guard, and I honestly didn't know how to respond, so I stayed quiet. He dropped me off, but instead of driving away, I saw his car parked across the street from my apartment for what felt like half an hour before he finally left. Not long after that, I got a text saying he made it home safely and that he thought he was starting to fall for me. That freaked me out. I'd been clear from the start that I wasn't looking for anything serious, and he'd claimed to feel the same way. I told him if that's how he felt, it was probably best if we took a break from hanging out for a while. About a week later, Alex messaged me again, asking if we could grab dinner. He'd found this Indian restaurant he thought I'd really like. I told him it sounded good and asked for the address. Instead of just sending it, he told me he'd come pick me up. 7 o'clock rolled around, and he texted to say he was downstairs. When I went to meet him, I saw him standing right by the gate to my building. I pressed the button to let him in, and instead of a greeting, he said, "Show me which one's yours. I'd love to see how you live." No, hi, no small talk, just straight to that. It felt weird, and I immediately got this uneasy feeling. I brushed it off, though, and told him I was starving and we should head to dinner first, promising to show him my place some other time. At the restaurant, things felt off from the start. He got a phone call midway through, but this time, instead of stepping away, he stayed at the table. "Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll let you know around 10, he said into the phone, then turned to me and asked, "Am I crashing at your place tonight?" I was caught off guard. No, I don't think so. I've got work tomorrow," I replied. "Yeah, me too," he mumbled before going back to the call. "I'll let you know, okay?" Then, as I sat there trying to process it all, I heard the person on the other end of the call say, You're not serious. Can you just grab your stuff? Alex replied. And do what with it? Take it to that girl you're seeing. I'm done asking you. At this point, I was frozen. My mind was racing. Who was this other person, and what was happening? Our food arrived, but neither of us said much after that. I broke the silence, asking him, "Why did you ask about staying over? I thought we were just hanging out." "Not like that." He spun some story about how he just wanted to chill and was curious to see where I lived. I told him bluntly that I wasn't comfortable with people I barely knew coming into my apartment. He seemed upset, but the conversation died down again when the bill came. Like the last few times, we paid separately. As we got up to leave, I told him I'd get an Uber home. He just shrugged and said, "What's the point? I already know where you live." "Just let me take you home," Alex said, his voice calm, but something about it felt wrong. By then, I'd already made up my mind that this was the last time I'd ever see him. As I got into his car, I reached into the back seat to grab my jacket, which I'd tossed there earlier. That's when I noticed a bag sitting back there, full of clothes, toiletries, and even a pillow. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, my sister keeps the most random stuff in her car too, so I figured it wasn't that weird. The ride home was awkwardly quiet until, out of nowhere, Alex muttered, "You're so selfish. I've been driving you around without complaining, but you won't even let me crash at your place." I was done playing nice at this point. I never asked for a ride. I've always been fine with getting an Uber, and if it's such a big deal, I'll pay you back for what the Ubers would have cost. His face tightened, and the tension in the car grew even thicker. Just then, his phone rang again. I could hear the voice on the other end. "Your stuff's at the gate, Alex. You can either stay with your girlfriend or go to your mom's. I'm tired of you using people like this." Alex snapped, "I don't even talk to my mom, you idiot," and hung up. My mind was racing. Was that an ex-girlfriend? Someone he owed money to? Before I could fully process what was happening, he turned to me, furious. "Now I've got nowhere to go. Does that make you happy? You spoiled brat, living off your parents' money, getting rides from me like I'm your chauffeur." I froze. My heart was pounding, and my hands felt cold. I wasn't sure if I was going to cry or throw up. All I could think about was getting away from him as fast as possible. I started planning an escape in my head. There's a cafe under my building, and if you run through it, you can get to a side gate that leads to the back of my apartment complex. That gate has fingerprint access, so if I could just make it there, I'd be safe. He pulled up to my apartment, and as soon as the car stopped, I bolted. I dashed into the cafe, running straight through without looking back, and made it to the side gate. I slammed my finger on the scanner, and it clicked open. I hurried up to the second floor, breathing hard, and knocked on a neighbor's door. They let me in right away. I told them everything, still shaking, and asked if they could call the cafe to explain why I had just run through like that. I blocked Alex's number that night, and I haven't heard from him since. I'm still not entirely sure what his deal was, but I have a pretty strong suspicion he was homeless and looking for a place to crash. Maybe the girl on the phone was another Tinder date who made the mistake of letting him into her home, and he just wouldn't leave. All I know is that he terrified me, and I hope I never see him again. It happened sometime in late 2014, when I had just turned 22. My first real heartbreak hit hard, and I was desperately trying to find a way to distract myself. That's when I downloaded Tinder, mostly to kill time, not with the intention of starting anything serious. As I swiped mindlessly, I matched with a guy whose profile said he was about my age. He was tall, around 6'4", originally from Morocco, and had recently moved to Portland, Oregon, where I lived. He played basketball and seemed like an average, decent guy in his photos. Let's call him Omar. Omar and I decided to meet up the following night at a cafe near the university. I didn't have my driver's license yet at 22, so I had to ask my brother to drop me off. We planned to meet around 7 p.m., and when I got there, I sent him a message on Tinder, since he mentioned his phone was still on a foreign plan. No reply at first. That was the first red flag, but I brushed it off. After a few minutes, he finally texted back, saying he was close. While I waited, I fiddled with my phone, watching my battery drop fast. I decided to tuck it away and sat on a bench across from the cafe, feeling more awkward by the minute. In hindsight, I should have left. After waiting for what felt like forever, about 40 minutes later, Omar showed up, hopping out of an Uber. He looked like his photos, so I relaxed a little. I got up to greet him, and we exchanged a quick hug. Nothing unusual at first. But suddenly, he leaned in for a kiss. I pulled back, caught off guard, and nervously laughed it off, saying, no, thanks. He shrugged but tried again, this time more insistent. I firmly said, no. That was my second red flag. He seemed unbothered, though, and asked if I was ready to head inside. Hesitantly, I agreed. We walked into the cafe, and the hostess asked us to wait for a table. Omar immediately started arguing with her, saying, "There are empty tables everywhere, we can just sit ourselves." Without waiting for a response, he walked past her and found a table. I shot her an apologetic look, feeling embarrassed by his behavior. I had already mentioned to him earlier that I was short on cash this week, so I couldn't cover my part of the date. He told me it was no big deal and that he'd take care of it. When we sat down, the server handed us menus and offered a hookah, but Omar waved it off. The waiter then suggested drinks, and Omar said yes, even though we were both under 21, which meant no alcohol for us. He just ordered a Pepsi. Yeah, just a soda. I went with a water since I wasn't feeling like spending much, and we started making some awkward small talk. Honestly, I can't even remember what we talked about because it was so forgettable. What stood out was how he kept checking his phone, barely engaging in the conversation. At one point, though, he randomly pointed at me and said, "You were supposed to be my girlfriend." Not asking, just stating it like it was some kind of fact. By that moment, I knew this was definitely a one-time thing. The server came back to check if we needed anything else, and out of nowhere, Omar stood up and said, "Let's get out of here. I'm done with this place." I asked, "Aren't you going to pay for what we had?" He acted like he forgot, saying, "Oh, right." I was mortified. He had almost walked out without paying, leaving me totally embarrassed in front of the staff. After he finally paid, we left the cafe. I started thinking it might be a good time to end the date, but when I went to check my phone, I realized it had died. Great, just what I needed. Omar then asked if I wanted to take a walk around a nearby park, and even though I wasn't really feeling it, I agreed, because I didn't know how to say no back then. As we were walking, he leaned in close again and said, "Can I kiss you now?" I awkwardly replied, "Maybe later," just trying to avoid confrontation. But then, a few steps later, he blurted out, "I don't think I can wait any longer." Before I could even react, he grabbed me by my waist and forced a kiss on me. The whole thing was so aggressive, and then, out of nowhere, he asked if I was a virgin. I lied and said yes, hoping it would make him back off. Instead, he smiled and said, "Me too. We can change that together." My stomach dropped. He then started kissing me again, this time using his teeth like he was biting me. It felt awful. I was 5'8", and about 145 pounds back then, but standing next to his 6'4" frame and around 230 pounds, I felt tiny. And this was happening in a park, after dark, with barely anyone around. Terrified, I shouted for him to stop, trying to push him away. I told him to stop touching me, my voice firmer this time. After a few moments, he finally backed off. By then, I was completely done with this whole situation and needed to get out of there fast. I asked if I could use his phone to call someone for a ride, and he handed it to me. That's when I realized I couldn't dial my mom's number since his phone was still on a Moroccan plan. A small wave of panic hit me. I suggested we walk to a nearby store or cafe so I could try and get some Wi-Fi, hoping to download a free texting app and contact someone. He walked with me, still trying to make small talk, asking if we could meet up again. Not wanting to provoke him, I said, "Sure, but tonight just didn't go well for me. I need to get home." He looked at me and said, "I feel like after tonight, I'm never going to hear from you again." I lied and assured him that wasn't the case. Eventually, we found Wi-Fi outside a little diner, and I managed to reach my mom, asking her to come pick me up at the park where she'd dropped me off earlier. He insisted on walking me back there, and I didn't feel like I had much choice but to agree. As we made our way back to the park, he glanced around and spotted a random guy walking by. He leaned over and said, "That guy makes me nervous. I'm kind of scared of black people." I just stared at him, confused, because, well, I'm black. He quickly added, "Not you, though. You're different. It's just the way he's walking. It looks like he's going to rob me or something." At that point, I was beyond checked out mentally. I was just trying to keep things calm and not risk upsetting him while we waited for my ride. Out of nowhere, he leaned in for another kiss. And this one was just as bad as before, all teeth and no care for how uncomfortable it made me. I pulled away as fast as I could and tried to change the subject, glancing around desperately for my mom's car. I don't remember how the conversation shifted, but at some point, he pulled out his wallet and showed me his ID. He had told me he was 22 like me, but his license said he was actually 17. My stomach churned. I immediately asked him why he had lied about his age. He got defensive and said, "I didn't lie. I had my age changed on the ID when I moved here." I felt sick, completely creeped out by the whole situation. Just then, I spotted my mom's car pulling up in the distance, and I've never felt more relieved. I quickly stood up and told him that my ride was here, making an excuse to leave. He asked if we could hang out again sometime, and I said, "Yeah, sure," just to get him off my back. As soon as I got into the car and the door shut, I blocked him on every app and unmatched him on Tinder. I'm 29 now, and looking back, I can't believe how naive I was back then. I've grown so much since that night, and I've learned never to let someone treat me like that again. Plus, I'm happily engaged now, so I never have to worry about getting caught in a mess like that. I've been hanging around this sub for a while, but never shared anything. Part of me didn't want to relive it, but I think I'm finally ready. It's going to be a bit long, so bear with me. If you're impatient, there's a TLDR at the bottom. Let's rewind to late summer 2017. I, a woman in my early 20s, was desperately trying to distract myself from the endless grind of university work. Like a lot of people do when they're single and bored, I was messing around on Tinder. I wasn't actually looking for anything serious, too busy with exams and life, but chatting with new people helped pass the time. One day, I matched with a guy, let's call him Brian, who happened to go to the same university as me. He seemed nice enough in his profile, and his pictures were, well, not bad. We chatted on the app for a few days, and after some casual back and forth, I figured he wasn't a psycho. Oh, how wrong I was. I gave him my number. We texted for a while, and soon after, he asked if he could call me. I wasn't against it, so I said sure, why not? We started talking on the phone regularly, and by regularly, I mean every day. He'd call at random times, like while I was eating lunch or when I was about to go to bed. Honestly, I didn't think much of it at the time. Most of the conversation was him talking about himself, but I didn't mind since I'm not the type to open up to strangers anyway. And truthfully, I was feeling a bit lonely. It was kinda nice to have someone paying attention to me, even if I wasn't totally into him. After a couple of weeks, Brian asked if I wanted to meet up. By then, I'd finished my exams and had some free time, so I agreed. We decided to meet downtown. I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw him, I was a bit taken aback. His photos had definitely been a bit generous. It was him, but the magic of angles and filters had worked overtime. Still, I didn't want to be that shallow, so I pushed the thought aside and went through with the date. In hindsight, I should have picked up on the weird vibes. He asked odd questions like, "Why don't you make more eye contact?" And, "Are you always this quiet?" Dude, do you want me to stare you down while I drink my beer? That's just awkward. But I brushed it off. The night went on, and we kept drinking. Normally, I would never invite someone over on the first date, but I had a few too many. And well, you can guess what happened next. The next morning, I dropped him off at the train station and went back to my place for some much-needed sleep. Later that evening, Brian called me, asking if we could hang out again. I was hesitant. I wasn't really feeling a connection, and I knew the only reason I brought him home the first time was because of the alcohol. But saying no made me feel a little guilty, so I agreed. The next day, he came over again. That's when things started to get seriously uncomfortable. I felt this growing sense of unease, like something wasn't right. Looking back, it was probably my gut screaming at me to get away from this guy. So, I decided to be upfront. I told Brian I wasn't interested in anything serious, apologized, and offered to drive him home. He didn't take it well. The entire car ride back, he sat in silence, clearly angry. I felt awkward and guilty, so I stayed quiet too. When we got to his place, he jumped out and slammed the door behind him. I knew I'd messed up. I shouldn't have agreed to see him again when I wasn't into it, and I should have been honest with him sooner. But I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, which is why I did my best to clear the air as soon as possible. The next day, I called him to apologize once more. He said it was fine, and we ended the call. I figured that was the end of it, but oh, how wrong I was. A few days later, I was getting ready to start back at university. That morning, I woke up to this massive text from Brian. He rambled on about how my reaction the other night had totally thrown him, and how he was really looking for something stable. Before I even finished reading, my phone rang. It was him, calling me at 7 a.m. I'd just woken up, so I can't remember everything he said, but I repeated that I wasn't interested in taking things further. He hung up, and that's when stuff started getting seriously weird. For the next few weeks, he seemed to pop up everywhere. He followed me around campus, sometimes lurking behind walls, eavesdropping on my conversations. He kept texting, even though I stopped replying, and called me constantly, sometimes 7, 8, 10 times a day. It was unsettling, but part of me thought maybe he was just hurt and didn't know how to handle it. Still, it felt wrong. Brian was always hanging out with another guy, who I'll call Mark. Every time I went to the library, they'd be there, sitting together, not far from wherever I was studying. Brian would stare at me while I tried to focus, and if I left to grab a coffee or take a break, he'd follow. It got to the point where my friends started messaging me whenever they spotted him creeping around. I tried my best to avoid him, but it didn't seem to matter. He was everywhere. I told him repeatedly that he was making me uncomfortable and that I didn't want any more contact, but nothing seemed to get through to him. The stalking just continued, and I felt like I was slowly losing my mind. Then, about 2 weeks later, I went to a party where I met my now boyfriend. It was an instant connection, one of those whirlwind romances where everything just clicks. He's honestly the most loving, kind person I've ever been with. Yeah, it sounds like a fairy tale, and I know I'm gushing, so try not to roll your eyes too hard or puke all over your keyboard. After meeting my boyfriend, I knew I had to stop putting up with Brian's behavior. I sent him one final message, making it clear that he needed to leave me alone. Then, I blocked him again. I thought that was the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. Brian kept showing up everywhere on campus, only this time, his friend Mark was nowhere to be seen. One afternoon, I was sitting in the library, trying to study. Brian was a few tables away, as usual, when suddenly someone sat down right in front of me. It was Mark. I glanced over at Brian, and the look he gave Mark was absolutely chilling. It was like he was ready to kill him. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I had never spoken to Mark before, and he hadn't paid any attention to me until now. I thought maybe Brian had sent him over to talk to me, but Mark didn't even acknowledge my presence. He just focused on his books. I took a break, stepping outside for a smoke, half expecting Brian to follow like he always did. But this time he didn't. I was relieved, but didn't think much of it. When I came back in, Brian slipped out the door. That's when things got even weirder. Mark turned to watch Brian leave, waiting until he was completely out of sight. Then he leaned toward me and said, "I need to talk to you. I think you're in danger." I was stunned. My mind was racing, and I had no idea what to say. He continued, "I know this is strange. We don't know each other, but I'm genuinely worried. For both of us, actually." I just sat there, trying to process what was happening. "We don't have much time before Brian comes back," Mark said. "When you stepped outside, he freaked out on me for sitting near you. Please, when he leaves, can we talk?" I nodded, feeling a wave of fear roll through me. My hands were shaking. Around 6 p.m., Brian left. Mark and I waited another hour just to make sure he wouldn't come back. We didn't want him to see us together. By 7 p.m., we were sitting in the campus cafeteria, and that's when Mark told me things that still give me chills. He explained that Brian had a disturbing way of talking about women, how he liked the idea of controlling them. It was more than just talk, though. A few weeks before, Mark started noticing odd behavior from Brian, how he would attend random classes, even ones he wasn't enrolled in. Sometimes he'd show up to classes Mark was taking, but Brian wasn't a student in those courses. That's when Mark became suspicious. He did some digging and realized Brian didn't even have a university email, which is required for all students. Mark went to the administration to check. That's when he learned the truth. Brian wasn't a student at all. He never had been. After finding this out, Mark cut off all contact with him, but Brian didn't take it well. He started harassing Mark, texting him constantly, calling him, and even following him around campus. As Mark told me all of this, I could see how terrified he was. He was shaking, and honestly, so was I. But what he told me next was even worse. Mark said he had to warn me because Brian had been saying some pretty terrifying things about me. At that point, I felt like I might burst into tears. Brian had been obsessing over me, talking about me constantly. Before Mark stopped speaking to him, Brian started making jokes about wanting to rape me. He told Mark he knew where I lived, that he could show up at my place anytime he wanted to surprise me. He knew where I parked on campus and said he could wait for me in the shadows. He always said it in this casual, joking tone, but Mark had been seriously freaked out. By the time Mark finished talking, we were both shaking. Tears were already welling up in my eyes, and the weight of what I'd just heard was crushing me. I always thought Brian was weird, but I had no clue things were this bad. We were nearing the end of the semester with a few weeks left, and both Mark and I knew we couldn't keep living in fear every time we were on campus. So, we decided to take action. First, we went to campus security. They took the situation seriously. The next morning, I noticed the walls around campus were plastered with posters listing emergency contact numbers. Mark and I stayed in close contact with the head of security, who seemed genuinely concerned about the safety of the students. It wasn't long before security managed to catch Brian at the library. They told him not to return. We also decided to go to the police. We didn't file a formal complaint. There's a term for it that I can't quite remember, but they added a note to his record, just in case anything ever happened. If something did, the police would know there had been an issue before. The officer I spoke with seemed uneasy. I asked him why, but he couldn't say much. He did warn me, though, that if I ever saw Brian on campus again, I needed to call the police right away. How's that for comforting? I was shaking the entire ride home. A few days later, I got a voicemail from Mark. He was completely freaked out. He said he had found out stuff he wasn't supposed to know. Apparently, Brian was seriously unstable, had been arrested multiple times, and spent stretches in mental health facilities. He was also a heavy drinker and addicted to drugs, with a violent past. Mark told me Brian had been accused of attempted assault before, and was living off some kind of government assistance, which explained why he had so much free time to hang around the campus. I couldn't believe it. None of this had crossed my mind when I first met him. Afterward, I reached out to a friend who works in law enforcement. They weren't supposed to tell me anything, but they confirmed everything Mark had said. From that point on, things started to settle down a bit. Brian was still hanging around the campus, but he kept his distance. He wasn't following us anymore, but I could always feel his eyes on me from a distance. Finally, the semester ended, and I left town for a few weeks. It felt like a weight had lifted. I didn't set foot on campus that whole time, and I was relieved to be away from it all. When the spring semester rolled around, Brian was still there. He wasn't following me like before, but he was still watching, always watching. I started feeling that familiar dread all over again. But then, COVID hit. Classes shifted online, and I haven't seen Brian since. I don't know if he's still creeping on other people, or if he finally became a legitimate student. Whenever I think of him, my heart still races. I just hope I never see him again. This story might not be as terrifying as some I've read here, but it left a deep mark on me. 4 years ago, I decided to give Bumble a try. Back then, I was 28, and while most women my age had already been on a dating app or two, I hadn't. My last relationship started when I was 19. We met in college, got engaged after 5 years, had a child, and I thought I was content. But over the last year together, things turned sour. He started resenting me and the life we had built together. I tried holding things together, but the arguments became more frequent and the fights escalated. Eventually, I took our daughter and left the house late one night, feeling broken and hollow. After that, everything was a blur. I spent months trying to rebuild, a new place, a new job. Slowly, I felt some semblance of normalcy creeping back into my life, though I was lonelier than ever. Weekends were especially hard, as I shared custody of my daughter and spent those days by myself. I didn't want anything serious, but I craved some sort of connection, something that wasn't as heavy as my past relationship. Bumble seemed like a harmless way to explore that. It was a strange mix of thrilling and nerve-wracking. But after everything I'd gone through, the rush of attention was addictive. Compliments came easy on the app, and I needed them, even if they were shallow. That's when I matched with Matt. He wasn't overly charming or breathtaking, just a regular guy. But that's what I liked about him. He was approachable. Matt and I had a few shared hobbies: craft beer, long walks, and a love for corny jokes. We made plans to meet at a small cafe nearby. I remember how anxious I felt before the date. It was the first time in almost a decade that I'd been on one. I threw on a cute dress and some makeup, trying to calm my nerves as I drove there. When I arrived, I felt like I was going to throw up. Matt showed up a bit late, and the initial few minutes were filled with awkward small talk. We ordered drinks, and after a couple of sips, the tension began to melt away. Our conversation started flowing naturally, and it wasn't long before we were laughing about the most ridiculous things. He made a joke about a karaoke bar across the street, saying he hated singing in front of people. I, on the other hand, loved karaoke, even if I wasn't particularly great at it. I'd spent countless nights belting out off-key songs at a local dive, my go-to way of blowing off steam with friends. I somehow convinced Matt to join me for a few songs. We left the cafe, headed across the street, and that's where the real fun began. We sang until our voices were hoarse, taking shots in between songs and teasing each other. By the end of the night, we were in his old car, clumsily pulling at each other's clothes, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the release I needed. We texted back and forth after that night, and soon, we were planning our second date. I didn't feel any deep emotional attachment to him, which was a relief. He was fun, but not someone I saw myself getting attached to, which made things feel safe. For our next date, we decided to go floating down a river nearby. We parked his rusty old van at the finish point of the tubing trail and took my beat-up car upriver to start. We figured he'd zip my car key into his swim trunks and drop me off at my car later. The sun was blinding that day, baking the ground under our feet, but the river was cool and crisp, a perfect contrast. Hours passed as we lazily floated downstream, just soaking in the quiet. Eventually, we made it to the end, deflated the tubes, and started walking back to my car. That's when Matt reached into his pocket, and his face instantly went pale. I lost your key," he stammered. I thought he was messing with me, so I chuckled at first. But he wasn't laughing. My stomach dropped. Panic crept in. It was the only copy of my car key, and it had been in his pocket while we floated down the river for hours. We'd stopped at random spots along the way to swim. How on earth were we supposed to find it? He offered to drive me home, and I agreed. On the way, we made a plan to meet the next day and check all the spots where we had stopped, just in case. The next afternoon, we scoured every beach, every bend of the river where we had taken a break. We weren't hopeful, but we had to try. For hours we searched, diving into the murky water, moving from spot to spot. Just as the day was ending, When the sun turned the sky a burnt orange, something shiny caught Matt's eye. There, half buried in the sand under a shallow patch of water, were my keys. I couldn't believe it. Against all odds, we had found them. Ecstatic, we decided to celebrate by grabbing drinks at his place. He drove me down this long dirt road, overgrown with trees, and at the end was an old trailer, half hidden in the shade. He mentioned he was just renting a room from an older couple who owned the place, but they were away for the week, so we had the place to ourselves. We climbed up the creaky wooden steps of the porch and stepped inside. The trailer smelled musty, and the kitchen was a disaster zone. Dishes piled everywhere, countertops covered in crumbs and trash. I hesitated, but Matt ushered me toward his room. It was even worse in there. The bed was just a mattress on the floor, dirty clothes scattered all over the place, and a plastic bin filled with cheap beer and snacks like chips. We had sex, though afterward, I just felt off. The yellowish light of the room highlighted every stain on the walls, and the excitement I'd felt with Matt before had completely fizzled. As I lay there, I knew this would be the last time I'd see him. I left soon after, and over the next week, we barely texted. It was clear our short fling had run its course. I wasn't upset. I had moved on, and my mind was elsewhere. That weekend, I had plans with my friends to hit up a karaoke bar. I was looking forward to it, hadn't seen them in a while, and we always had a blast together. The day of, I got a text from Matt out of the blue. "You going to karaoke tonight?" he asked. Surprised, I responded that I was. His reply came quickly. "I'll be there too," he wrote. "Just thought I'd let you know." Confused, I shot back, "I thought you didn't like karaoke." "Got invited by a girl I work with," he said. "Just figured I should give you a heads up in case you see me there." I thanked him for the heads up, told him I wasn't bothered, and hoped his date went well. Around 9 p.m., my friends and I rolled into the karaoke bar, the same dimly lit place with tinsel and neon lights that I'd been to countless times. We grabbed some drinks and snagged a booth close to the stage, the perfect spot to soak in the action. But as we settled in, I got this weird feeling, like someone was staring at me. I glanced around the room, and sure enough, there was Matt, sitting with his date a few tables away, eyes locked on me. He waved enthusiastically, a huge grin plastered on his face. His date turned around to see what was happening, and I awkwardly waved back. It wasn't that him being there bothered me, but I didn't want to make his date feel uncomfortable or like something was weird. My friends knew the whole story. They were aware of the brief thing Matt and I had, and they'd seen the text he sent me earlier. We all found it odd that he went out of his way to interact with me in front of his date, but whatever. He was just being friendly, right? The night went on, and we were having a blast, singing and laughing, letting the drinks flow. A couple of hours later, I was deep in conversation with my friends when Matt suddenly stumbled over to our table with his date, who he introduced as Sarah. He plopped down next to me, pulling her into the booth with him. The heavy smell of alcohol hung around them, and it didn't take long to realize they were both absolutely smashed. Their eyes were glassy, and their speech was all over the place. Despite her drunken state, Sarah seemed sweet and launched into some long, rambling story about her job. My friends and I felt pretty uncomfortable. Then, under the table, I felt Matt's hand slide onto my thigh. I froze, his date sitting right next to him, oblivious. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I gently moved his hand off and made an excuse to grab another drink. As I walked to the bar, I could feel his eyes on me. Sure enough, when I turned back, he was staring. When I returned to the table, Sarah was slurring about how her taxi had arrived. They exchanged a sloppy, drunken kiss before she stumbled out the door, leaving me and my friends alone with Matt. Once Sarah left, his mood shifted. He was still drunk, but now he seemed a bit sour, clearly not happy that his date had left without him. His attention immediately shifted back to me. He threw his arm around my shoulders, leaning in close, his breath thick with alcohol as he muttered, "You're so cute. I love your laugh." I sat there, stiff, wishing he'd just leave. When he wandered off to grab another beer, my friends and I huddled up to talk about what was happening. One of them said, You know you deserve way better than this, right? I nodded, realizing just how much of a mistake this had been. We quickly decided to cut the night short, worried he wouldn't leave me alone if we stayed any longer. We came up with a backup plan. If things got sketchy, the girls would slip out to the bathroom and sneak out the back, while our guy friend would keep Matt distracted long enough for us to get away. Matt came back to the table, spilling his beer down his shirt as he slurred, "Where are we headed next?" I hesitated for a moment before my friend stepped in, telling him we were all heading home. Matt, clearly not ready to call it a night, pouted and insisted on walking us to our cars. We politely declined, but he wasn't having it. By this point, he was leaning against the wall, barely able to keep himself upright. We asked him how he was planning to get home and if he wanted us to call him a cab. He pouted again, drunkenly mumbling about how he could just crash at my place instead. I shut that down quickly, explaining that my daughter was home with a babysitter and it wasn't happening. Still, he refused the taxi, saying he'd just sleep it off in his van. He was so out of it, with his eyes half closed, that I figured it was probably best to let him crash in his van for the night. At least then, he'd be safe. As we made our way out, Matt stumbled after us, insisting again that he should come home with me. My friends and I exchanged looks, realizing it was time to put our backup plan into action. The girls and I excused ourselves to the bathroom while our guy friend distracted Matt. The moment we slipped out the back door, the cool night air hit us, and we hurried down the path toward our hotel. A few minutes later, our friend caught up with us and said he'd managed to leave Matt behind at the bar. We all sighed in relief, finally free of the awkwardness and weird tension. One of my friends, who had stayed sober, offered to drive me home once we got back to the hotel, and I gladly accepted. But as we walked down the dimly lit path, my phone started ringing. I checked the screen, and my stomach tightened. It was Matt. I turned the ringer off and let it go to voicemail, but a few seconds later, I saw he'd left a message. Curious, I turned on the speaker and played it for my friends. Matt's voice was slurred, confused, and barely coherent. "Where are you guys?" "I thought we were gonna hang out. What's going on?" We all laughed nervously, glad we'd gotten out of there when we did. But then my phone rang again. Another voicemail popped up, and this time, his tone was different. The words were still slurred, but there was a strange intensity to them as he said, "I don't get why you left. You hurt me, and I think I'm in love with you." That last part sent a chill down my spine. His voice was thick with emotion, but there was something off about it. My friends all looked at each other, clearly freaked out, and we picked up the pace as the hotel sign came into view. We walked through the carpeted hallway to the room so my friend could grab her car keys. But just as we stepped inside, my phone rang again. The next voicemail shook me to my core. Matt's voice had taken on a darker, angrier tone. "I love you," he said again. But this time, it sounded more like a threat than a confession. He ranted about how I'd abandoned him, how I'd embarrassed him, how he didn't know what to do with himself. His words were jumbled and furious, and then, the last line cut through the room like a knife. "You know, I'm really starting to fucking hate you." Fear washed over me. I was glad that this side of Matt hadn't come out earlier, back when we were alone at his trailer. My friends wrapped me in a hug, telling me to call if I needed anything and to keep them updated. After that, my sober friend drove me home. As I unlocked my front door and stepped into the quiet of my house, I felt utterly drained. The night hadn't gone at all as I'd expected, and Matt's bizarre behavior had really rattled me. Fresh out of a toxic relationship, his sudden mood swings and creepy voicemails brought back memories I'd been trying to forget. That's when I noticed headlights in my driveway. It was late, way too late for anyone to be visiting. My heart pounded in my chest as I peeked through the curtains. My blood ran cold. There, in the cab of his beat-up orange van, was Matt, staring at my house. Panic set in. How did he get here? He could barely stand when we left him at the bar. Was he that drunk and still drove across town? And worse, how did he know where I lived? Then it hit me. He had dropped me off once before, back when I'd lost my keys after tubing. He must have remembered the way. How could I have been so naive? I barely knew this guy. We'd only hung out a handful of times. Yet there he was, parked outside my house, his face locked in a furious glare, just sitting in his van. He wasn't moving, just staring. I crouched down by the window, peeking out from behind the curtain. The house was pitch black, and I was sure he couldn't see me. Then my phone lit up again. He was calling. I quickly silenced it, afraid the glow might give me away. With trembling fingers, I played the voicemail. This time, his voice was different. It was sing-songy, almost like he was mocking me. "Where are you?" he slurred, dragging out the words. Then, the line went dead. A shiver ran down my spine. I was terrified now. I hadn't really considered that I might be in actual danger. I'd tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, letting my past experiences mess with my head. But that last voicemail, that sealed it for me. Maybe I was overreacting, but at the very least, he was drunk and behind the wheel. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I told the dispatcher what was happening. She assured me that officers would be there soon. I hung up and went back to the window just in time to see him get out of the van. He wasn't waiting anymore. His steps were clumsy as he staggered around, looking for me. And then he started yelling. "Where are you?" His voice was filled with rage, echoing through the quiet street. "Where are you?" He was stumbling toward my front door when the red and blue lights lit up the street, casting an eerie glow over everything. The police had arrived, 2 cars pulling up with officers stepping out. From my hiding spot, I watched as they approached him. They spoke for a while, breathalyzed him, which of course he failed, and then checked his van. I couldn't hear everything, but I saw one officer head toward my house. I met him at the door, explaining what had happened. He was kind, understanding, but as he told me, unless there was a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. They'd charge him with DUI and keep him overnight, but he'd be out the next day. The officer advised me to lock my doors and stay cautious. I watched as a tow truck arrived to haul away his van. Matt, clearly drunk and belligerent, argued with the cops, but they weren't having it. They slapped the cuffs on him, and as they locked his wrists, he turned toward my house, his eyes zeroing in on the window where I was hiding. "I know you're in there," he shouted, a wicked grin creeping across his face. "Why don't you come say goodnight?" Then, just like that, it was over. The street emptied, the flashing lights disappeared, and the only thing left was the quiet of the night. I exhaled, shaken but relieved. But the relief didn't last long. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Matt. "I'm really sorry about last night. I wasn't in a good place." My anger flared. How dare he? I fired back a response, telling him his behavior was unacceptable, especially showing up at my house where my child lived. I made it clear I never wanted to hear from him again. He sent one last apology, and then silence. In the months that followed, I'd occasionally spot him around town, riding his bike to work. I figured he'd lost his license. Every time I saw him, my heart would race, half expecting him to try and approach me. But he never did. Still, the fear of running into him always lingered. Eventually, I heard he'd moved out of town, to the mainland. That news brought a wave of relief, and I finally started to feel like I could breathe again. The constant edge I'd been living on dulled. So Matt, wherever you are, let's hope we never meet again.